I still remember the morning they took it. The sound didn't belong in our valley. That jagged hum of machinery, the crunch of gravel under heavy tires. It sliced through the soft rhythm of my land like a wrong note in a peaceful song. When I stepped out onto the porch, mist still hung low over the creek. The sun was trying to burn through it, turning the air into pale gold. But what I saw below froze me. That MY bridge, the one I'd built with my own hands 12 years ago, was gone. Where it once arched gently over the water, there was now a pile of broken boards and tire ruts gouged into the mud. A backhoe idled nearby, its operator leaning casually against the bucket. And behind him, a white pickup with the HOA logo on the door. That I walked down the hill, half numb, half disbelieving. The bridge wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was the thread that connected my home, my sanctuary, to the world. It crossed the narrow creek that separated my land from the subdivision's private access road. Without it, there was no way out except hiking through a quarter-mile of woods. When I reached them, the man in the safety vest gave me a polite smile, as if this were a normal Tuesday. "Morning, sir. HOA maintenance crew. We had to remove an unapproved structure encroaching on community property." I stared at him. "Encroaching?" He gestured with his clipboard toward the creek. "Yes, sir. The board received complaints that this bridge was blocking community water drainage and wasn't built to code." The words felt rehearsed, bureaucratic, lifeless. "That bridge," I said slowly, "is on my land." He gave a faint shrug, the kind that says he's just following orders. "If you have any concerns, you can take it up with the board, but as of this morning, the obstruction has been cleared." I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stood there, watching the mist curl around the wreckage. That I end that quiet. Something inside me shifted, the kind of quiet rage that doesn't explode, but hardens. When they left, I walked the creek's edge, tracing the line where my property met theirs. My father had shown me those markers when I bought this land, weathered wooden stakes, half buried under weeds, still visible if you knew where to look. The bridge had always been inside my boundary. Always. But that's the thing about HOAs. They move like vines. Slowly, quietly, wrapping around what doesn't belong to them until it's too late to pull them off. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge, I stood by the empty space where my bridge used to be. The air smelled of mud and pine sap. The creek bubbled softly, like it was whispering something only I could hear. I thought about all the years I'd lived here. The quiet mornings with coffee and birdsong. The evenings where the valley filled with the scent of rain. I'd built my home piece by piece, not just with tools, but with care. And now, strangers with clipboards had driven in and torn a piece of that away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that empty creek crossing burned in my mind. I kept replaying the words. Unapproved structure. They said it like my home was a mistake. That I in the darkness, I started thinking about how it began. The little letters, the small warnings, the way the HOA had slowly started creeping closer. They weren't supposed to have any control over my land. I wasn't even part of their subdivision, but they didn't like that I lived so close to their boundary. They called it non-conforming property. The first time they left a letter on my gate, it had been about my fence color. Then about unauthorized access through community land. I'd laughed at it, tossed it away. But now, standing by that creek, I realized it wasn't just pettiness. It was power. They wanted control, and they'd made the mistake of thinking I wouldn't fight back. The next morning, as dawn light poured over the valley, I grabbed my old survey maps. My father's handwriting still marked the boundaries, black ink faded to brown. I laid them across the kitchen table, ran my fingers over the lines, the coordinates, the small notations that read, private easement, retained by owner. That bridge had been mine, and I was going to prove it. Not just to them, but to everyone who thought a clipboard and a rulebook could override the truth written in the dirt. Sometimes revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with knowing exactly where the line is, and watching someone step over it before the bridge was torn down. Life here had a Rhythm so gentle you could almost forget the world outside existed. Each morning began the same way. The mist rising off the creek like steam from a sleeping beast, sunlight filtering through the pines, and the quiet hum of insects warming their wings. My dog, Ranger, would trot beside me as I crossed that bridge, his nails tapping softly against the wooden planks. It was our daily ritual, a small moment of peace before the day began. I built that bridge the summer after my father passed. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy, thick cedar beams anchored deep into the bank, built with care, not speed. My father had taught me how to read a slope, how to brace for current, how to build something that would last longer than a man's lifetime. When I hammered the last nail into that bridge, I remember whispering, "For you, old man." For years, it stood as the quiet link between what was mine and what was theirs. The HOA subdivision started just across that creek, a cluster of polished homes, all painted in the same shades of beige, with lawns so manicured they looked artificial. The kind of place where neighbors waved, but never talked for long. That I wasn't one of them. I'd bought my land long before the HOA was formed. An old farmhouse and 15 acres off mixed woods and meadow. My property line brushed their development on one side, but it never signed into their covenants. I had no interest in community meetings or architectural harmony. At first, they left me alone. I was the quiet neighbor with the dogs, the one who chopped his own firewood and mowed his own field. But as their subdivision grew, their curiosity turned into irritation. They didn't like that my gravel drive wasn't paved, or that I didn't keep my porch light on all night like everyone else. Then came the first letter that IT was polite, almost apologetic. A friendly reminder about maintaining visual consistency with neighboring properties. I smiled when I read it, folded it neatly, and tossed it into the fireplace. The second letter wasn't so friendly. They claimed my bridge crossed into HOA managed drainage land. That phrase, managed drainage land, was the seed of everything that came after. I remember driving into town that week, asking the county clerk about property lines. She smiled, pulled out the old plat maps, and said, "No, sir. That bridge of yours is well within your parcel. Always has been." She even printed me copies, black and white maps with faint grid lines, and the legal description my father once highlighted in yellow. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought common sense would win. But in HOA country, common sense is optional. Over the next few months, I noticed little changes. A survey stake appeared near the creek, marked with bright orange ribbon, not one of mine. Then a community maintenance access sign was posted at the end of their road, facing my direction. Subtle warnings, like whispers carried on the wind. Still, I held my peace. I spent my days tending the garden, repairing fences, walking the property line every Sunday morning. I had a habit of noting every fallen tree, every shift in the soil, the kind of things only someone deeply connected to their land would notice. The bridge stood quiet through it all. Birds nested under its beams, moss grew along its edges. Sometimes I'd sit there at dusk, listening to the creek murmur beneath, thinking about how fragile peace can be, how it can vanish with one wrong decision. One Saturday, as I was clearing brush near the creek, I noticed two men standing on the HOA side. They wore the same khaki uniforms I'd seen before, maintenance contractors. One of them was holding a clipboard, pointing at my bridge. I called out, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" They froze, exchanged a look, then walked off without answering. Something inside me stirred that day. A quiet warning, like the low rumble before a storm you can't yet see. Over the next week, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but the feeling didn't leave. Every time I looked at that bridge, it felt like someone else's eyes were on it too. A few days later, I came home to find a notice taped to my mailbox. Notice of unauthorized STRCURE pursuant to HOA Article 3, Section 8. All structures impacting community land or easements are subject to review and approval. Please remove or submit plans for compliance within 14 days to avoid fines or legal action. And no letterhead from the county. No signature from a code officer. Just the HOA seal and the arrogance of people who think authority can be printed on paper, that I took that notice, walked to the creek, and pinned it to the bridge post with a rusty nail. Then I stood back, watching it flutter in the breeze. "There," I said quietly, "filed under nonsense." That night, as the crickets sang and the frogs echoed from the water, I remember thinking how calm everything felt, like the stillness before a match is struck. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear my father's voice. "Don't let them take what's yours, son. Not an inch." But I didn't know then that they'd already made up their minds. The decision to destroy my bridge wasn't about drainage, or rules, or community. It was about ownership, about showing me that I wasn't beyond their reach. And that morning, when I heard the machinery and ran down to the creek, it wasn't a surprise. Not really. It was just the storm finally breaking. The morning after they destroyed my bridge, I woke up to silence. Not the good kind, but the heavy kind that presses against the walls. The kind that feels like the air itself is waiting for what comes next. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee gone cold, staring at the folded notice the HOA had left behind. The paper was crumpled, smudged with mud from where I'd picked it up near the creek. I must have read it 20 times, hoping that somehow I'd misunderstood it. But the message was simple. They thought they had the right to erase what was mine. The thing about power is, it doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, with polite letters and fake smiles, until one day, you realize you're surrounded by noon. I was standing in the county office again, a file folder tucked under my arm, waiting for someone to make sense of what had happened. The clerk, same woman as before, looked up when I walked in. "Oh," she said softly, "you're the bridge man." I nodded. "Apparently not anymore." She frowned, typed something into her computer, then pulled up a series of property records. "Your parcel's still recorded under your name. No encroachments filed. No complaints logged with the county." So the HOA had no legal authority to remove anything? "None," she said flatly. "If they stepped onto your land without permission, that's trespassing and property damage. You can file a report." I thanked her, took the paperwork she printed for me, and walked out into the bright midday sun. But as I crossed the parking lot, something in me hesitated. Filing a report would start a fire, one that couldn't be easily put out back home. I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Old plats, survey maps, deed transfers. Every line told the same story: the creek, the bridge, the access point, all mine. My father had been meticulous, and now that precision was my armor. That night, I sat outside on the porch, listening to the crickets and thinking. People always imagine revenge as heat, rage that burns bright and fast. But the real kind, the lasting kind, feels cold. It's careful, patient. That I wasn't just going to fix my bridge. I was going to make them regret ever touching it. The first official HOA letter came 5 days later. It was printed on glossy paper with their crest embossed in gold, preserving community standards since 1989. It read, "Due to noncompliance with community safety standards, the board has taken necessary measures to remove an unsafe structure. Future construction or excess modifications adjacent to community land require prior approval." I almost laughed. Community land. That phrase again. That I wrote a short reply, attached copies of my deed and county plat, and mailed it certified. A little reminder that I wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, another letter appeared. This one was colder. Unauthorized rebuilding or alteration of the disputed area may result in legal action. Legal action. That was their favorite threat. The kind of phrase meant to make people fold. But I'd learned something about bullies when I was younger. They don't know what to do when someone doesn't flinch at SO. I didn't. Instead, I called a land surveyor, a quiet man named Whitaker who'd worked in the county for 40 years. When he came by, his truck rattled down my drive, kicking up dust. He was the kind of man who carried his measuring tools like an extension of himself, precise, steady, and patient. That I led him down to the creek. He stood there for a long time, studying the stakes, the old markings, the remains of the bridge. They tore it clean off the bank. He said quietly, "Yep." He adjusted his cap, then smiled a little. "Well, I'll tell you what, that line." He pointed to far bank. "That's still your land. About 4 feet past where the water runs. Always has been. HOA's encroaching, not you." He marked new stakes, double-checked his readings, then handed me a copy of the updated boundary map. "You've got everything you need to make their lives interesting." When he said that, something inside me settled that I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I was right, and I had proof. Word spreads fast in small neighborhoods. Within a week, I could feel eyes on me whenever I drove past the subdivision entrance. The HOA president, a man named Gordon Lang, started appearing at the edge of his lawn whenever I passed. He was tall, silver-haired, with a permanent half-smile of someone used to getting his way. One afternoon, as I was pulling out, he waved me down. "Afternoon," he said, voice smooth as syrup. "You've probably seen the correspondence from the board." "I have." "Well, I just wanted to clear the air. We don't want any hostility between neighbors. The bridge situation, it was just about safety, nothing personal." I looked at him for a moment. "You sent a crew onto my land and destroyed my property, that's personal." He gave a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "Technically, it was on community access land. These boundaries get fuzzy over time, but we're happy to work with you on a compliant rebuild." Compliant, that word again. "Tell you what, Gordon," I said, "I'll rebuild my bridge when your board learns to read 80. His smile faded. "That's not the kind of tone that helps us move forward." "Then maybe stop moving backward onto my property." I drove off before he could answer, but in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, phone already in hand. Over the next month, it became a chess game. Every few days, a new notice would appear, fines, warnings, mandatory hearings. They claimed my property line was under review. I responded to each one with calm precision. Attached county plats, legal references to property rights, photos of the old survey markers. They wanted to bury me in paperwork, but I buried them right back, under facts they couldn't twist. Around that time, I began noticing something strange. The subdivision's main access road, the only paved road leading to all 50 homes, cut directly across the corner of my land. It had always been there, a narrow slice near the creek. My father used to call it the easement strip. I'd never paid much attention to it, but now, I dug through the old deed and found the clause he'd mentioned once in passing. Owner retains full title and rights to the access strip, including revocation of easement upon breach of use or alteration by adjoining parties. In simpler terms, if anyone using that road infringed upon my property, if they trespassed, destroyed, or altered any portion, I had the legal right to revoke their access. The realization hit me like a spark. They destroyed my bridge, claiming authority they didn't have, while driving across a road they didn't own. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The HOA ramped up their efforts. They began patrolling near the creek, inspecting for erosion. Once, I caught a board member taking pictures of my house from the opposite bank. When I confronted him, he claimed he was documenting environmental compliance. That night, I installed a motion-activated camera on a tree near the bridge site. Within 2 days, I caught footage of a pickup parking on my side after dusk, headlights cutting across my field, then turning back when the driver saw the sign I'd posted. "Private property. Trespassers will be reported." That I didn't call the sheriff yet. I was saving that card. Instead, I called Whitaker again. "Can you do me one more favor?" I asked. "Sure," he said. "What's the job?" "I need a certified survey of the access road. The whole stretch. Every inch." He came out the next morning with a bigger team. They walked the road, drove stakes, took GPS readings. By sunset, he handed me the report, sealed, dated, notarized. "Mr. Lang's HOA has been driving through your property for years," he said. "This proves it." When I looked down at the map, I saw it clear as day. The road that fed their entire neighborhood sat squarely on my land. And with that single piece of paper, everything changed. The next HOA meeting was held the following week in their community center, a low building with glass walls and too much lighting. I wasn't a member, but I walked in anyway. The chatter died instantly. Gordon Lang stood at the front mid-sentence when he saw me. "Mr. Hayes," he said, voice tight, "this is a members-only meeting." "Good," I said. "You'll want everyone here for this." I laid the survey packet on the table. "This is the certified boundary report for parcels 21A and 21B, my property and the adjoining HOA development. It shows that your access road, the only one connecting your subdivision to County Route 9, runs directly through my land. I have full title." A murmur rippled through the room. Some faces turned pale. Others whispered. Gordon laughed, but there was a tremor in it. "That's absurd. That road has existed for decades." "It has," I said, "because my father allowed it. But your board broke the terms of that easement when you sent equipment to demolish my bridge. You forfeited your right of access the moment you crossed that line." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then I added quietly, "As of today, you have 30 days to negotiate a new easement agreement or find another way out." And then I walked out. The next morning, their tone changed. By the end of that week, my mailbox overflowed with letters, all carefully worded, suddenly polite, requesting discussion. Their attorney called twice. I didn't answer. I was polite but firm in my written response. "I will not entertain negotiations until damages to my property are acknowledged and compensated in full." For the first time, they were on defense. The power that once flowed from their printed letters now hung limp. They'd built their empire on control, and now, every car in that subdivision rolled daily across land they didn't own. The same land belonging to the man they tried to humiliate. As I stood by the creek one evening, watching the water slide beneath the broken posts off me bridge, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not yet, but certainty. The kind that comes when you know the tables have turned. There's a quiet kind of power in knowing you've got time on your side, when the other side's panicking, and you're just waiting. For the first time in months, I felt at peace again. The same calm I used to feel standing on me bridge, listening to the creek. Only now, the water beneath wasn't just flowing. It was eroding something far bigger than soil. It was carving into their confidence. Days passed, then weeks, and with every passing day, I could see the cracks forming inside the HOA. The first sign came in the form of desperation. Gordon Lang showed up at my property one afternoon, parking his SUV at the gate. He waited, hands clasped behind his back, until I came out. "Mr. Hayes," he started, forcing a smile. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. No one here wants this to escalate." "Too late for that," I said. "I understand your frustration truly, but blocking access to 50 homes, that's not something you want on your conscience." I leaned against the fence, calm. "And demolishing a man's bridge? You didn't think that through either, did you?" He exhaled, trying to keep control. "The board acted on the information we had. We didn't realize the access road crossed your deed. But I'm sure we can find a compromise." "Sure," I said. "You can start by admitting you trespassed and paying for what you destroyed." "That's complicated," he said carefully. "The board has to vote on any expenditure. But I can assure you, we're committed to resolving this quietly." "Quietly," I repeated, watching him squirm. "You mean without a record?" He didn't answer. That I opened the gate, just enough to step closer. "You've got 27 days left. After that, the road closes. I suggest your board votes quickly." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded and left. The dust from his tires hung in the air long after he was gone. Within a week, the HOA sent a formal offer, $3,000 in good faith for damages. It wasn't even close to the cost of what they'd destroyed. I refused it. Then came the legal posturing. Their lawyer, a polished man named Cutter, emailed a long letter claiming that historical use of the access road constituted implied easement. meaning they believed decades of driving on it gave them permanent rights, that I called my attorney, a local man named Doug Fenton, who'd handled land disputes since the 70s. He read their claim, smirked, and said, "They're bluffing. Implied easement doesn't stand if written revocation rights exist. You vegged it in your deed. You hold the key." Doug was slow-spoken, steady, the kind of man who didn't get rattled easily. "Let them dig their own hole," he said. "Every letter they send makes your case stronger. Document everything. Keep calm. Don't block the road yet. Let the clock run out." And that's exactly what I did. I kept mowing my field. I kept walking the property line. I even nodded politely at the HO board members when they passed me on the road, all while the countdown ticked toward their deadline. Around that time, something interesting happened. I started getting quiet visits, not from the board, but from homeowners inside the subdivision. The first was a woman named Evelyn, mid-50s, soft-spoken, carrying a basket of muffins like we were neighbors in some old TV show. She stopped at my gate and smiled nervously. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said. "I just wanted to say, I think what they did to your bridge was wrong." Her voice trembled, like she was afraid someone might see her talking to me. "I appreciate that," I said. "You live up on the ridge, right?" She nodded. "We didn't even know about the road issue until your notice went around. Gordon told everyone it was just a small boundary confusion. But my husband looked up the county maps. He says it's pretty clear." "Clear enough," I said. She hesitated. "They're trying to raise HOA dues to cover legal fees. People are furious. I just thought you should know." I thanked her and watched as she hurried back to her car. Over the next few days, more came. Some waved from their driveways. Others sent notes tucked under my gate. One even slipped me a copy of an internal HOA email, a panicked message from Gordon asking members not to engage with the property owner. It made me smile. They'd spent years telling everyone they were the law. Now they were learning what real law looked like. The pressure finally broke 2 weeks later. Doug called me on a Thursday morning. "You want to come down to the county hall?" he said. "Seems the HOA filed an emergency motion to declare the access road public." "Public," I said. "That's absurd." "Exactly. Come see for yourself." When I arrived, the hearing room was half full. HOA members on one side, a few local reporters on the other. Gordon sat at the front with Cutter, his lawyer, looking tired but defiant. Doug and I took our seats quietly. The county commissioner read through the motion, then leaned forward. "Mr. Lang, this document requests that we seize private land from Mr. Hayes and reclassify it as a public roadway. Do you have evidence that this land was ever dedicated for public use?" Cutter cleared his throat. "We contend that continuous access and maintenance by the community over time establishes a precedent." The commissioner interrupted. "Precedent doesn't override recorded ownership. Mr. Hayes' deed includes full title with revocation rights. We can't and won't strip a citizen's property for convenience." The silence in that room was deep enough to drown in. Doug leaned over and whispered, "That's checkmate." But the best part came after. The commissioner turned to me and said, "Mr. Hayes, if you wish to restrict access, the county will support enforcement of your rights." I nodded. "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." When I stood, I could feel every eye in that room following me. Some angry, some relieved, most shocked. That was the moment it shifted. The moment the HOA realized this wasn't going away quietly. The following Monday, I sent my final certified letter to the HOA. Notice of revocation of access easement effective immediately. All rights of passage across parcel 21A are revoked due to breach of covenant, trespass, and property destruction. Unauthorized entry will be considered trespassing under state law. That I signed it. Dated it. Mailed it. 3 days later, I installed a heavy steel gate across the road. Not a flimsy one, solid, bolted into concrete, with a keypad lock. A posted sign read, "Private property. Access revoked by order of owner." That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch watching cars approach, slow down, then turn around one by one. Their taillights flickered red through the trees like fading gimbers. At by nightfall, the subdivision was sealed off from the main highway. Their only exit now was a dirt maintenance trail half a mile north, barely wide enough for one car, and completely unpaved. By morning, chaos erupted. The HOA group chat leaked within hours. One message thread spread through the community like wildfire. Can't get out. Hayes locked the gate. We need to call the sheriff. This is illegal. Except it wasn't. Doug had already informed the county sheriff's office, and the reply came back simple. Owner has legal right. No violation. By noon, homeowners were gathered at the gate, arguing with Gordon, filming with their phones. I stayed inside out of sight, but I watched from the window as frustration boiled over. Some shouted for the board to resign. Others demanded refunds of their dues. And through it all, Gordon stood there, sweating, stammering, trying to explain that it would all be resolved soon. But it wouldn't be. Not this time. That evening, Cutter called Doug. He wanted to meet, privately. Doug agreed on one condition. Everything had to be in writing. They met the next morning at Doug's office. Cutter's tone had changed. The board is willing to compensate Mr. Hayes for the bridge damages, he said, and Thierry requesting reinstatement of access. Doug leaned back in his chair. Compensation first, $18,000 for materials, survey costs, and legal fees. Payment within 30 days. Then we talk about access. Cutter blinked. That's excessive. Doug shrugged. Then they can enjoy their new hiking trail. By the next week, the check arrived, full amount. No argument that I use part of that money to rebuild the bridge. Not exactly as it was, this time stronger. Stone supports, reinforced beams, all built with quiet precision. It wasn't just a bridge anymore. It was a reminder carved into the landscape. As I laid the last plank, Ranger trotted across it, tail wagging, as if he'd been waiting all along. The creek whispered beneath us, sunlight dancing across the water. For the first time since that morning, the valley felt whole again that I didn't reopen the road. Not yet. I let them live with the inconvenience a little longer. Let them walk that dirt trail in the rain. See what it's like when arrogance meets consequences. They eventually sent another letter, asking for long-term access. This time, I wrote the terms. They would pay an annual maintenance fee. They would fund repairs to my bridge. They would acknowledge, in writing, that the land was mine. They agreed. And just like that, the same HOA that once tore down what was mine, now paid me yearly to use it. When people picture revenge, they imagine fireworks, loud, messy, and quick. That's not how this kind of payback works. The real kind is slow and surgical. It doesn't need spectacle. It needs leverage, patience, and an understanding of the rules the other side thinks will protect them. That's where the homeowner wins, by using the law, map lines, and a quiet refusal to be bullied. The first thing I did was stop pretending emotion would help me. I set it aside, put on a flannel shirt and boots, and treated the problem like a project. That's the moment this turned into a true HOA revenge story. Not because I wanted to humiliate anyone, but because the HOA had weaponized rules against me, and I intended to turn the same system back on them. People underestimate how much power lives in a file folder. I gathered every scrap of paper my father left, the deed, old tax receipts, notarized notes about the easement strip, and the plats stamped by the county. I made copies, then copies of the copies. Each document became a small light in a dark room. When the HOA waved their glossy letterhead, I had facts that I hired Whitaker to do a certified boundary survey. That survey didn't just mark lines. It produced an official artifact the HOA couldn't ignore. When you're dealing with an organization built on appearances and polite threats, an official report is like sunlight in a stuffy room. It reveals dust. It reveals rot that I kept meticulous logs of every interaction, every letter, every voicemail, every truck that came across my land after they'd torn down the bridge. My motion camera recordings, time-stamped and dated, showed people parking on my side and walking toward the creek after dark. That evidence would later be invaluable. In the hands of someone who knows homeowner rights and property dispute law, a camera and a plat map speak louder than anger that I called Doug because his kind of experience can't be replicated by internet forums or angry posts on social media. He knew the statutes, he knew the county clerks, and he could read an easement clause and tell you where to squeeze. He told me to do 3 things: document everything, never block access until the legal basis is ironclad, and use the county as an impartial referee. Doug did something quiet and efficient. He opened a file, put in the certified survey, and wrote a letter that used legal language like a scalpel. That letter didn't threaten theatrically. It stated facts, referenced covenants, and outlined remedies. It demanded compensation, not vengeance. The effect was immediate. People who hide behind gold-embossed letterhead like slow, methodical law. It strips them of their moral theater and leaves them with numbers. Point one of the best strategic moves was surprisingly simple: listen. I stopped thinking of the subdivision as an alien force and began listening to the people inside it. Not everyone off them loved the board. A few were as fed up with petty rules as I was. I found allies in places I hadn't expected. An elderly woman who remembered driving across that road with her husband decades ago. A young couple who were tired of increasing HOA dues. A handyman who quietly hated Gordon's habit of micromanagement. Their small acts mattered. Evelyn bringing muffins mattered because it represented public sentiment shifting. The internal email that leaked mattered because it revealed panic. When a community's quiet majority thinks the board overreached, the board's power is theater. And theater dies when the audience turns on it. There's a moment in any legal fight when patience becomes a weapon. Doug told me to wait while the HOA filed motions and sent lawyers. Each letter they sent was like a bell tolling their own mistakes, admissions, awkward phrasing, claims of historical use. Their lawyer tried to claim an implied easement, but the manifested rights on my deed were clear. With the certified survey and Whitaker's notarized testimony, their argument crumbled. When the county commissioner publicly sided with me, I didn't gloat. I let the county procesto its job. Then I sent the formal notice of revocation and installed a gate, built to code, bolted to concrete, with a locked keypad. The gate was a physical manifestation of the legal decision. It wasn't a stunt, it was enforcement. It turned their everyday convenience into a visible consequence. Power often lives in money. If the HOA had a budget and a membership that relied on easy access to the highway, then changing that equation was part of the plan. I demanded compensation for the bridge, survey costs, and legal fees. It wasn't about greed. It was about making them pay the real cost of their choices. When Cutter tried to lowball me with a good faith check, I refused. Negotiation is a game of offers and counteroffers, and if you start from weakness, you end there. Doug's number was fair but firm. The actual replacement cost, the survey fees, costs for records, and an annual easement fee if they wanted continued access. Those terms were reasonable, but they carried teeth. Paying meant acknowledging fault. When the HOA finally cut the full check, it was more than a reimbursement. It was recognition. They'd crossed a legal line, and the cost of that crossing was now in their ledger. They now paid to use what they thought they owned by default. I never called a reporter. I didn't post viral videos. But the story leaked. In small towns, people talk. The homeowners who'd been forced to walk the muddy service trail talked at block parties. The grocery clerk mentioned it in line. A local columnist wrote about it as a case study in homeowner rights and community governance. That quiet reputation damage is enduring. A board that acts heavy-handed loses moral authority. New members ask questions. Prospective buyers look twice. That reputational shift wasn't vindictive, it was corrective. In the long run, the HOA had to earn trust it had squandered. Once the board acknowledged fault, in writing, we negotiated terms. These weren't humiliating. They were practical and persistent. They funded an annual maintenance fee for the access strip, agreed to pay for my bridge's upkeep, and signed a clause acknowledging me land title and revocation rights. They also agreed to hold open forums for members to vote on governance changes. That last part mattered. It changed structure from secrecy to transparency, that I insisted on one more thing, a clause that required the board to notify me before any action affecting my land, with 30 days' notice and a formal vote. That clause was the real lesson that IT turned their previous arrogance into a contract. Every year, their accountants had toe count for the fee. Every time someone wanted to change a policy that touched me, the record showed who voted which way. The sweetest payback wasn't money or signed papers. It was the return of my mornings, the quiet coffee on the porch, the dog's paws on the new planks, the creek whispering like it always had. For months, they tried to make me small with fines and condescension. I claimed my days not by shouting, but by proving their assumptions false, that I was isolated, that I couldn't marshal law and community, that the little man could be bullied into silence. There's a dignity in setting boundaries and holding them. The gate, the signed agreement, the repaired bridge, each was a visible promise. They had taught me to guard what was mine. I taught them to respect it. When it was all settled, I walked the creek one evening, the same place where my father had once pointed out the easement stakes and said, "Remember, son, property names are more than ink. They're promises." The new bridge hummed under my feet, sturdy and true. The gate stood closed but fair, with a posted number for emergency access and the logbook for deliveries. Gordon eventually resigned. Some board members were replaced. The neighborhood meetings became less performative and more procedural. The change didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correction, a suburban justice where accountability replaced entitlement. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, beyond the small thrills of watching a bully falter, it's this. The clearest form of payback is not humiliation. It's reinstatement off boundaries, enforced with quiet competence. When someone abuses power, the answer isn't to mimic them. It's to use the system they believed would protect them. The storm ended the way most storms do. Not with thunder, but with silence. It's funny how quiet victory can be. No applause, no raised voices, just the hum of cicadas, the rustle of leaves over the repaired bridge, and the knowledge that balance had returned to the world in the most natural way possible. Weeks after the settlement, I noticed the small things first. The HOA's maintenance truck stopped idling near my fence. The board's newsletters came in a softer tone, no veiled threats, no friendly reminders. The access road stayed locked, the keypad working perfectly. Occasionally a utility worker or landscaper would call for entry, and I'd meet them at the gate, clipboard in hand, logging each visit. Every time, I felt that quiet satisfaction of order, fair, legal, peaceful order. Across the creek, the neighborhood kept living its curated life. Lawns were trimmed, porches swept, and sprinklers hissed in perfect rhythm. Yet there was something different in the air now, a restraint. People had learned that property lines weren't suggestions, that private ownership was not arrogance, but heritage. At Gordon's house went up for sale a month later. No announcement, no goodbye. The sign appeared one morning, tilted slightly in the wet grass. Within a few weeks, a moving truck pulled up, and the man who'd once tried to control everything left without a word. I watched from the edge of the bridge as the tailgate shut, with a dull echo. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like closure. What surprised me most wasn't the board's downfall, but how the neighborhood changed after. Without the constant hum of control, people started acting like neighbors again. That Evelyn's kitchen lights glowed late into the night, baking muffins for the volunteer cleanup group that formed after the board turnover. Kids started playing near the creek again, something they hadn't done in years. One morning, the new president, a retired teacher named Wallace, came by to introduce himself. His handshake was firm, polite. "Mr. Green," he said, "I've read through the files. You were right from the beginning. I'm sorry it took this long for the rest of us to see it." I nodded. "It's all settled now. Let's just keep it that way." He smiled. "That's the plan." That moment didn't need celebration. It was the sort of quiet agreement that defines real peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of mutual respect. Rebuilding the bridge became more than construction. It became ceremony. I used cedar again, like before, sealing each plank with care. Ranger lay nearby in the grass, tail flicking lazily. The creek shimmered in sunlight, reflecting gold off the new boards. When the final nail went in, I stood back and listened, to the sound of the water, to the soft creek underfoot, to the stillness of a space reclaimed. That bridge had seen so much: defiance, loss, patience, and finally redemption. It wasn't just wood and bolts. It was proof that what's built with intention endures longer than what's taken by arrogance. That I placed a small brass plaque at the edge. It read, "For those who build, not destroy." That IT wasn't for the HOA or for the viewers who'd later hear this story. It was for my father, and for anyone who's ever stood on their own soil, told they didn't belong there. Did I think about it often? How easily peace is mistaken for weakness. When the HOA tore down my bridge, they thought I'd cave. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence, when chosen, is strategy. It's the calm before the truth unfolds. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives in envelopes and court stamps, in signatures, and the soft click of a lock sliding into place. What I learned through it all was simple. Know your boundaries, both physical and personal. Document everything, even when you think it doesn't matter. And never let arrogance rewrite history you can prove in ink, because in the end, the land remembers. The maps remember. And so does the law. When the sun dips low over the pines and the water glows amber, I still walk that bridge. That ranger's older now, slower, but he still trots beside me. Sometimes, when the air is perfectly still, I catch a faint echo of the bulldozers that once roared here, not in anger, but as a memory of what it took to earn this peace. Across the creek, the HOA's manicured lawns look almost like paintings. They're neat, quiet, and distant, exactly how I like them. The gates still stand between us, not as a wall, but as a boundary everyone now understands. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone tried to take what you've built and erase it, remember this. You don't need a shout to be heard. You just need patience, proof, and apron, because sometimes the calmest people deliver the loudest lessons.